Yes. Are demons real and active today? Yes. And we realize that, and we realize our place with that. But the main focus is not Satan, is not demons. Our main focus is the Lord, and greater is He who is in us than he who is in the world. So what I'd like to do this morning is simply look at a history of spiritual warfare. Where did this all start? How did this idea that we are at war come about? And then what's our present situation? I'd like to take a look. How does Satan and how do his demons operate in the world today? And then finally, I'd like to take a quick look at application for the future. Okay, we know that this is true. How can we apply this to our daily lives? What do we need to do? So first, let's take a look at the history of spiritual warfare. And by the way, because of a technical glitch, the scripture passages, the reference will be up here on the screen, but it won't have the actual verses. And maybe you can help me out with that next week, Pastor Jim. But if you're a note taker, there's going to be some things, we're going to go through a lot of material, and I'm not going to have time to turn to every scripture passage, but it'll be up on the screen. So if you're a note taker, I encourage you to write down these references for future study. But right now I'd like us to look at the history of spiritual warfare. Where did this all start? And what I'm going to turn to is Ezekiel chapter 28, starting in verse 11. And let me tell you that Ezekiel chapter 28 describes a king, the king of Tyre. Now, many people believe, because of the similarities of this to the passage in Isaiah that talks about the fall of Satan, as well as the language in this passage, as we'll read, you'll see, many people believe that this describes the fall of Satan. I happen to believe that this passage describes the fall of Satan. Now, some will say this is simply speaking metaphorically of an earthly king. But let's take a look at this passage. Ezekiel 28, starting in verse 11. It says this: "The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take up a lament concerning the king of Tyre, and say to him, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You are the model of perfection, full of wisdom, and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone adorned you, ruby, topaz, and emerald, crystallite, onyx, jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and beryl. Your settings and mountings were made of gold. On the day you were created, they were prepared. You were anointed as a guardian cherub." That's an angel. "For so I ordained you. You were on the holy mount of God. You walked among the fiery stones. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created till wickedness was found in you. Through your widespread trade, you were filled with violence, and you sinned. So I drove you in disgrace from the mount of God and expelled you, O guardian cherub, from among the fiery stones." And it says this in verse 17, "Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings." And so we see that it was pride that Satan fell. It was because of pride. Pride of his wisdom. Proud of his beauty. Then look with me to Isaiah chapter 14, starting in verse 12. Isaiah chapter 14 in verse 12. And I'll read through 15. And here's another description that parallels very closely what we just read of the fall of Satan. Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12. He says, "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of dawn." By the way, in the King James Version, it doesn't say morning star, it says, "O Lucifer. You have been cast down from the earth. You have once laid low the nations. You said in your heart, I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of the assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit. So the first thing that we see in the history of spiritual warfare is that Satan exalted himself. He was a created angel. We know in Genesis 1:31, everything God created is good. In fact, it's contrary to God's nature. He cannot create something bad, something evil. So the perfect God created a good being, but He gave him free choice. And as He made Satan obviously beautiful, He gave him wisdom. And because of those very things, those gifts of God, Satan became proud of that and boastful. And it says he exalted himself. He said, I will be like the Most High. And a side note, that's something that we need to check in our own minds. Are we proud of the things that God gave us? The spiritual gifts that we have, do we begin to think, I'm really something? Be careful, because that's the same trap that Satan fell in. He was proud of his wisdom. He was proud of the things that he had obtained, not realizing that everything he had was from God. And God dealt with him appropriately. Now I'd like us to look to Revelation chapter 12. Starting in verse 3. In Revelation chapter 12, verses 3 through 4, John wrote this. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on his heads. His tail swept 1/3 of the stars out of the sky and flung them to the earth. Now, some people believe that this passage is talking about the fallen angels. Some people believe that this is talking about what we call demons today. That these were angels that had followed Lucifer. By the way, Lucifer, or Satan, rather, just means adversary. And that's certainly what he's become, as we'll see in our study this morning. So some people believe that this picture of the tail of the dragon sweeping the stars has to do with taking God's angels, the demons, and throwing them to the ground. I'm not so sure whether or not that's a accurate interpretation. But we do know in Jude chapter 1, verse 6, that it talks about angels who have lost their authority. They lost their place in heaven, and they're being held for judgment. And